Hello and welcome to the UnWokable podcast. I am your host, Mark Owsley, and I am joined today by Dr. John Cox, Superintendent of PEGS Public Schools in Oklahoma, PEGS, Oklahoma, and he is running for State Superintendent of Public Instruction. And I'm excited to have you here today, Dr. Cox, to let us know, to get to know you, what you are, where you are on the issues that affect my listeners, concerning critical race theory, DEI, those adjacent things, and as well as just where you're at on public education. So thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's really good to have. I want to give everybody equal time, and my goal is to make sure that my audience is the most informed about the candidates that at least I consider a possibility in this race, and you're one of them. But I want to just give you an opportunity to introduce yourself, let us know your background, where you're coming from on education, just some general knowledge about you.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for that. Well, this is actually my 28th year of being superintendent principal here at PEGS. And before that, my first 8 years, I was a mathematics, computer science, athletics coach. So had that, coached high school athletics, basketball, track, all those sports that we do out in the country, out in the rural areas. So I'm proud of that, but really proud of the last 28 years of being here at this school, being part of a family environment. And I think that's so important because I would like to bring that to the state of Oklahoma, where parents are involved, where we know each other and we build those relationships to help children. So that's extremely important. And so I'm pretty well known across the state because I've been active for all these years in public ed. And I currently teach public school finance, which I think is important to this race at Mid-America Christian University. And I've taught all the other 4 courses that are required by law to be a superintendent principal. And just that knowledge base, I think, is extremely important to this position. But I also have 12 certifications on my teaching certificate. So I've earned those and active across the state in several organizations and several boards. One I'm really proud of is that I'm the president of the NSU Alumni Association. So I'm out advocating for the university that really gave me the foundation here to be the superintendent and really create a great life for me and allow me to give back to other people. So I talk about NSU everywhere, and I have earned a doctorate in EDS from OSU, from Oklahoma State University. And so I was able to attain that. And, I've just been part of this family out here for a long time. And I love serving and playing a role in people's lives and just helping them. And so that's what I'm doing here. And really, Mark, why am I running? It's just because I see a strong need that we need leadership at the State Department of Ed that can push back on some of these issues that we'll be talking about today, and have a pure understanding of what changes can be done in our schools to be an advantage for our children. So, yeah, we've got a long history. 28 years is, you can just say that's a lot of years, or you can say there were positive years being in the business, because I've been through, I think, 3 economic downturns. And so our small school was able to survive. And so I have a lot of wisdom there. So I think experience, and I'll say that a lot during this podcast probably. So.
Well, I think that's a valid point. I think experience does matter, and I appreciate you being willing to jump into the arena, so to speak. As you know, correct me if I'm wrong. You've run for this position before.
I did.
Yeah. Okay. And so you know what it's like to be out there and kind of get the slings and arrows and all of the things that come with that. But PEGS is a rural school district, correct? I mean,
Yes,
yeah. And I noticed that there seems to be a kind of I don't want to say a rub, but at least a dichotomy between the needs of a small school district, which Oklahoma is a lot smaller rural school districts, right? And
right.
say the districts like Tulsa or even Norman or OKC. In your position, and before we dive deep into the critical race theory stuff and some of the DEI things that I really focus on, I taught in a rural school district too, and I know that there are differences between large urban schools and smaller rural schools.
Right, right.
What are the biggest differences, and how what are the biggest differences between those two that you've seen in your experience? And how do you reconcile those, or how would you reconcile those serving both as the state superintendent over all the school districts in Oklahoma?
Well, I think, and you mentioned I'd experienced running before, and actually, I saw Joey Hoffmeister running, so that was my motivation to actually get out there and try to support what we're doing in public schools. And I just didn't think she had the level of education to be able to serve in that position and really know what we were doing, know the guts of public schools to make those decisions. So I've had experience doing that. And one of the things that she always tried to say is, well, John Cox is a good guy, but he's at a small school. And but when it boils right down to it, a child is a child, no matter if they're in the middle of 1,500 kids or if they're in the middle of 200. And so I look at it that way because I'm really focused on the individual child and what can we do to help that child be successful. So no matter if there's 10,000 or there's five, you still look at the individual child. And so in a small school, we wear lots of hats. And that's given me really an advantage over my competitors because I know every single area that the State Department of Ed has oversight over. And, all the way from child nutrition to transportation, federal programs, you name everything we do here. I have my hands in that and I have experience with that. So that's really the difference maker between myself and a real large school superintendent, because they hire people to do the jobs that I do. And they're more of a management and oversee of those people that do the jobs I do. So there's a true advantage there. I have learned over the last 8 years the trials and the concerns and the tribulations of our large urban schools and what they're going through. And I've kind of grown in the process. I would say 10 years ago when charter schools were becoming more prevalent, I was real skeptical of charter schools. But, after visiting in Tulsa and Oklahoma City and seeing the parents' need and the desire to escape and try to do something for their child, I could see the real need for charter schools in those areas. So I've really grown to respect what those parents' desires were for their kids and just, the position that they were in those schools. So it's like Mark, we talk about poverty. What's the difference between poverty and rural and the urban areas like Tulsa and Oklahoma City? They look different, but they're still the same. A child still has the same struggles, trying to have electric utilities for their house, running water, clothes. Do they have two parents in the house? What do they bring to the school when they come? So there is a lot of similarities. But what I see, and the boards that I didn't even mention the boards that I'm on, but I'm on one board that's over 500 school districts. I'm the chairman of it for workman's comp board. So I'm valued there. So I see large schools, small schools, and the insurance board that I'm treasurer of has 541 of these schools. And so I'm in a position to be able to see lots of things and be able to judge those. And so when it boils right down to it, it's about the child itself and not really where they're coming from. But I'm capable. I'm very capable of learning, and in no way do I say I know everything, because that would be a very boring life. I love to learn, and I love to listen, and probably that's really. I know I'm doing a lot of talking right now with you.
No, it's okay. No,
that is skill set.
Yeah.
To
Well, and
listen
I think as educators, that's obviously, they say never stop learning, and although experience is good, if you've stopped learning, you're dead, right?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, I do want to hit this because you mentioned it, and I want to get it in and out of the way, and I'm going to try to bring up everything that anybody would have worries over, but honestly, it's something that I have a worry over. You mentioned that you ran against Joy Hoffmeister.
Yes.
right? And you ran not in the general, but as a Democrat in the primary. Okay. Now you're running as a Republican.
Yes.
Can you explain for the audience here and for myself why? Because there is an issue here that we've all now been kind of smacked with, right? Joy Hoffmeister ran as a Republican, is now a Democrat. So I do want to preface this with my understanding of, especially in the last 3 years, there's been kind of a sea change in terms of the political landscape. I think there are many people that I'm close to and respect that 4 years ago, 5 years ago, would have considered themselves a Democrat. Now they don't consider themselves Republicans, maybe, but they're called the far right by the left and things like that. So, but there, I think, is a understandable, considering what we've gone through with Joy, okay, nervousness about the possibility that you could be a rhino or whatever you want to use for it. So can you help us put our minds to ease on that and give us some security that you are representing? If you're running for the Republican Party, you're representing Republican values, more conservative values in the state, and will do so if you win the office of state superintendent.
Yeah, I love this question. And more, it's this question's getting less because I think people see conservative values in me. And I really think, even like the people that you mentioned, the Democrat Party left us. I don't know where they went, but even though I was a registered Democrat, I really never was a true Democrat. At 18 years old, I registered Republican. My mom and dad, my family were all Republicans, and that was in Delaware County. And at the time, Delaware County was extremely blue. Probably, I don't know, half dozen people, including me, were Republicans. So I would go to vote in the primary, and there was nobody on the ballot. And so never really learned. I just thought being Republican was cool. At 18, I just thought that was a neat word. And so I was pretty proud of that, but I couldn't participate in the process. And so in Delaware County, I moved over to Democrat, and then I actually moved to Mays County, which was exactly the same thing, totally blue. And I've been here in Cherokee County over 20 years. And right now, just recently, the count has just become in favor for Republicans here just in the last few months. And so it's finally turning somewhat red here. And so after I ran, and when I jumped in the first time to go against Joy, I just saw that there was a problem. I saw, with Janet Breesy and everything that was going on there, there was just a problem in education. Everybody was irritated and angry. And I thought, well, I'm not going to complain. I'm just going to jump in the middle of it, both feet, run a statewide campaign and do something about it. And so Joy had beat me by 90,000 votes and basically 5% turnaround, and I could have won. But Republican groups across the state, they kept looking at me going, you're not a Democrat. The things you're saying are not Democrat. You're a Republican. And so this last time, I just didn't see any improvement in what we were doing in our schools and at my desk, coming down from the State Department. And so I ran against her again, and really to get out there and push the issues of public ed and what we need to do for our kids. But the Monday following that election, I waited 1 week because I didn't want it emotional. I wanted to do an intellectual decision on changing back to Republican. So about 4 years ago, I changed back to Republican for a lifetime and had no clue I would run again. I did not want to run again. But when I saw the two people that were coming up that the education elite were trying to put in, and then the governor's trying to put in, I just made the decision that I need to be there for kids and just go right down the middle and serve all our kids for the best of what's for them. And so my values are extremely conservative. I think if you describe me when I was running against Joy, I was a dino. And as we see now, Joy was a rhino.
Mm-hmm.
So
I see.
so
Kind
now
of cross paths and and things like that. Well, let me dig into that a little bit, because you have been around a long time. That experience is a virtue, and then that comes with some good. But I want to know where you were at, because I have a this is the way I have an ed degree, and I've been teaching and have been at the university level learning how to be a teacher, watching teachers, helping teachers learn how to teach. Um, Literally, either I've been in that realm or through college myself to learn how to be a teacher since 2003, right? And so I've kind of seen this critical turn. When I started school to become a teacher, No Child Left Behind had just started. And that kind of bled into Common Core, which went into Race to the Top and all these. But you, at these points, were literally kind of administrating um, through all of these changes. So I'd like to know your thoughts. And this will go into more of the issues that I normally talk about, but I am an educator and I know some of these things. I want to know your thoughts on that progression from No Child Left Behind to Common Core to kind of where we are now. And what were the issues with that? Where did you fall when it was happening? And where do you stand now?
Well, all the issues that are out there right now that we're talking about, I've been able to safeguard our school from, I guess, from those issues coming into our school. So really, I'm that kind of that guardian at the front gate to make sure we don't have all those social issues and those things coming in. But No Child Left Behind, I really think brought the national agenda into our systems, and they dangled the money out there for us. Ghost 2000 at the time, so I was, I guess, wise enough to use that money just to upgrade our technology and not to buy into any strings that attached with it. So just to really improve what we're doing here. So over the years, when I do these federal programs, I really try to landscape them where I can use them uh, for the classroom and not to bring those agendas in here. Common Core kind of snuck in with the Jeb Bush, the national agenda, the Florida. If we watch Florida, usually it comes here 3 or 4 years later. I don't want the national agenda coming in here. I want Oklahoma values and Oklahoma experts to be able to do our standards and watch over what we do. And that's what really concerns me about my opponent, basically, is bringing that element, bringing the Jeb Bush, the Ted Cruz, the Betsy DeVos initiative into our state, because I don't want them here. I believe we have experts in Oklahoma that can actually take care of the foundation of what we do. And I have really focused on all my years on providing a foundation for kids in math and reading, and really giving them the opportunity to be who they can be. So as we moved up through all those initiatives, I just saw that was too much overreach by the federal government. I really wish we didn't have a U.S. Department of Ed, and the money could come straight to the state so that Oklahomans can parse it out and to the schools, and because they're really just taking their cut of it
Yeah.
at the federal level, and then adding those strings, and yeah, like my school, out of a $2.5 million budget, probably 400 to 500,000 typically is our federal money, but I'm able to craft it where I don't have to abide by certain things that they come in. And Mark, I don't know if you know, but this week we received an email from the U.S. Department of Ed through the State Department of Ed about they're looking at rules if we how to treat transgender and LGBTQ, and how not to violate their rights. And I was reading that and I thought, why aren't we just looking at children as children and leave all that language out and get rid of it and just take care of a child? And it kind of hits you in the gut when you get letters like that, because if you have the Office of Civil Rights coming down on you, it's a pretty tough process. And of course, that's directly from Biden, because he kind of oversees that with his people,
Mm-hmm.
and pushes an agenda down here on, just the simple things about a boy should use a boys' bathroom,
Yeah.
and now they're pretty much saying you better not, if you're in the if if you're even discriminating at all, if you don't let someone who thinks they're a girl, if you don't let them play in girls' sports, then you're violating their civil rights. And to me, it's just not common sense, you
Yeah,
know?
well, and let that's great, a great segue. I do want to touch on something real quick because where you're going with this is there's you've unpacked a lot already, and that's great. But you mentioned that because that you've been able to keep some of the influence out of public schools of kind of the top down federal agenda,
Right.
whether it be transgender or even just the Common Core or whatever it may be. How were you able to do that? Because that seems to be specifically, how were you able to take the money but not the strings attached to it? In now, I think Title IX is a different thing, and we'll get into that in a minute.
Yeah.
But in the past, like with No Child Left Behind, or with some of the Common Core standards that couldn't be avoided by Oklahoma backing it off, how are you able to take the money but remove the strings of influence of this whatever social or educational agenda the federal government may have had?
Well, I've been really careful about the things that I've asked for that can't be tied to a certain curriculum. And so if you need Title I money for a teacher in a classroom to help in reading and math, I make it very clear that that's specifically what it's for. And so I don't find any gray areas that they can come back and say you need to be doing certain things, teaching certain agendas or philosophies. And so on my part, it's pretty simple. And to Mark, I live in a very conservative community who really respects what we do with our kids and have trust in us. So to help us be successful, that is really important, to have parents and community on the same with the same ideas as the superintendent in the school and the school board. So it makes it easy. I mean, it's really easy to do here, but I have complete oversight. So if a certain curriculum comes in that's pushing an ideology that is a social issue, or just indoctrination of some type of left-wing idea, I'm able to stop that. But if that sneaks in here, I immediately hear about it
Mm-hmm.
and stop it as fast as we can. And it's simple things like and you may have heard about this, about the surveys that the Oklahoma Department of Health want our 6th and 8th graders to take, and pushed by the State Department of Ed.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know how many years, 10 to 15 years, I've been getting those at my desk every January. And they want us to pass them out. And I look at them and I go, I can't have our kids see that, because a 6th grader should not be knowing about those certain things. And if they
Mm-hmm.
do, be a parent issue.
Yeah.
They shouldn't be hearing those. And I could say it on recording, but to me, it just turns my gut to talk about those things that a 10 or 11-year-old would hear.
Yeah.
And so Mark, probably about 2 years ago, they came in here and asked me if I would send it out. They actually come to the school and asked if I would. And so I just told them, I said, if you'll allow me to send it home to every parent and have that parent tell me it's okay, then I'll let their child do it. And there was kind of a look on their face that I remember. And they said, well, that might be okay. Come to find out, that wasn't okay, because they don't want parents to know what's being asked. And you go a step further, I'm going, why are they wanting that information?
Yeah.
Because there's no need for it. There's no,
Well,
why put
and let me build off that, because that is a huge issue that a lot of people are talking about it. The Oklahoma Health, and specifically mental health and substance abuse, they passed a law, and that's where a lot of these surveys come from. And these surveys are used as data points by municipalities, and I'll use Norman, Oklahoma, for example, to get block grants directly from the CDC. So that's passed out through ARPA, or block grant funding. And I want to just make sure my audience understands this too, is that the questions asked on these surveys, are to 11, 12 years old, 10 years old, are how suicidal are you, or what is your gender identity, and lists a series of options that may be beyond male and female. And that comes with a specific, first of all, it implants something in the mind of a child, especially at that age, right?
It does.
And what a child is in what they're exposed to, especially at that age. And I'm a music teacher, and so this hits home, because when you teach a child music, it sticks with them forever, right? And the things you implant at that age, you don't believe me? Try to sing the ABCs without singing them, say them without singing them. That is
Right.
part of, and the things that they see over now they're not singing the survey, obviously, but when you implant that, and these are surveys that oftentimes, at least in other states, they want them to take them several times a year, to measure where they're at. But then all of that data is being funneled to the federal government to get money from the federal government for things like building roads or building low-cost housing developments that will transform a small community like yours, right, into something that you may not necessarily desire it to be. And so I think that's an excellent point. And that gets into what you had mentioned about the issue with transgender ideology, or just it's called queer theory is what it's called. And as a state superintendent, or what we hear often, and this is something I'm wrestling with. My audience has seen me out there. I'm not necessarily a pro school choice person, but I am very much anti-woke. My channel is called UnWokable. I mean, you don't get much more unwoke than me. And James Lindsay, he would attest to that. If you know who that is, he will attest to that. But my concern is, and I want to dive into this a little bit, you hear from maybe some of your opponents, and there's merit to this, that we need to remove children from the public school in order to stop the wokeness in public schools. But what you're telling me is that a state superintendent, or even just a district superintendent, has some tools to be able to prevent that from happening within the public school system. And because you're a public employee, right, that's hired by a school board, I assume, right, you're subject to the votes directly of your direct constituents in PEGS, right?
Yes.
And so with that in mind, what are your thoughts on the idea that in order to remove government influence in kids in schools, we must inject government money into private schools, say via vouchers?
Well, okay, so I spent almost 2 decades studying vouchers and trying to figure out, is there a way to do it where the money's accounted for, because this is taxpayer money. And so, and in my job, we have to show every penny that we spend. So, one thing I think of when we talk about this is we start looking at social issues, and you talked about the money for these surveys. I'm wondering, why at the top are we having to give the surveys to get the money from the people that we vote in? That's my thought. And I would rather give up that money and not hurt the innocence of a child. I've been going all over the state saying we got to protect the innocence of a child. And every year over my time, used to be 8th graders that really were naive, and then it became 7th, and now we're at 5th grade level at 10-year-olds who know way too much about what's going on. And I just want to protect them from knowing things that they shouldn't know. So are we paying a price for their innocence, or to take it away from them just for money to fix roads? Or I don't understand. To me, I don't understand that. There should be grants regardless, because they know the rural areas need help, and they know inner city needs help, and so there needs to be different leadership in that spot if we have to subject our children to those things. So I'm pretty bold against those things, and it's just like, for all these years, I would not allow our kids to see that survey because I thought it was nasty. I thought it was wrong. So we can't sell ourselves, what they say, sell yourself to the devil. We can't. And it's really, it's not the kids. I don't think it's the kids' fault in elementary. I think it's the parents or teachers' influence in some places, but it's an adult that has the influence. And we just need to make sure that the adult that's in school systems are doing their job and just teaching and getting
Mhm.
the and doing that. And if there's issues that come out, get the parents involved and talk to the parents and see what they think about things and move the issues out to the home. And and we can talk more about home life, but the home life is the key to everything that we do. What a
Mhm.
child experiences there, and then at public schools we take every child at the doorstep. But if um, if we move money out of public schools and give them to private businesses, such as private schools, then we're going to erode the money that we have to fix the schools that we have. And if you think about it, there's a lot of kids out here, even in the rural areas, that don't have any other options. So are we going to underfund our public schools and not take care of those kids?
Yeah.
I I understand the 2 to 5% that I'm get educated guests that want to take their kids out or already have their children out of public schools for various reasons. I mean, I'm hearing stories all over the state, but the foundation of our public schools is through the locally elected school board. And it's their job to represent the community and hire a superintendent that will be vigilant in bringing in principals and teachers that will have the values of just getting to the basics and teaching. And I'm a Christian, but I don't impose my Christianity on anybody. I
Mhm.
try to role model it. I try to be good to people. I want them to see in me what they might want to be, and that's how I do that. I don't think we should push any kind of agenda, Christian or not. Um, but I think I should role model it for our kids, and that's the conservative part of me. Um,
Mhm.
but I, but moving public money over to a private entity just because we don't like public schools. Well, the state superintendent is in charge of public schools, and that's where I have a concern with my opponent. Is he's all about getting money over to the private schools while he wants to run public schools, and you can't be the leader if you have no followers. And if it was to be where, and I like him, I like my opponent, I think he's a very good young man. If you can't lead with followers, you're not going to get anywhere. And all over the state of Oklahoma, people are on pins and needles. Our educators are on pins and needles because they're going to get an anti-public education person as a state superintendent if that happens. And and I told him, and I've told him in other forums too, that 10 to 15 years from now, when he has all the training and gains the experience, and actually has people in his face disagreeing with him, where he has to figure out what can I do to help, and without having any emotions to come back at that person. When he's at that level, I think he will be really good. But
Well, yeah, and I I want to hit on a little bit of that because I think you've been in the education establishment for, and I don't want to use that word pejoratively. I'm using it just matter of factly. So,
yeah,
because it obviously has, but I want to play devil's advocate a little bit
sure.
because what I like about, and I'll say your opponent, because I've just interviewed him and everybody knows that, and
Okay.
I've worked with him, and what I like about him is that he's very strong on the issues when it comes to the kind of left push into uh, public education. I don't know that I agree with him wholeheartedly on all of the solutions, but that's okay. We're talking about one of those now. But I think the case could be made, to play devil's advocate, that maybe you were a part of what let it in, but obviously you're just in pegs, right? You've not been a statewide official, right?
Yes.
And I think that I've not heard of any indoctrination coming out of pegs, so you have that. But what would you say to that kind of critique, to say, hey, maybe we need some fresh ideas and some fresh energy in that position,
Sure.
that will try something more fiery, or for lack of a better term, a radical change to the institution that is, to use a talking point, producing the 49th worst in the country or best in the country. And I have issues with that talking point that I will just make plain that who's making those, who's saying we're up and down. But
Exactly.
what would you say to that critique that maybe you're not a fighter?
Yeah.
I don't see you going out and calling out some of the really radically woke parts of, say Tulsa or even Norman, or and the things where it's really obvious that this agenda is being embedded into our schools. What would you say to that critique, and how will you, as state superintendent, ensure that you will do that if necessary?
Yeah. Well, so I kind of think the same way you do about my opponent. He has some very good, strong points. And the thing is I think that's where it ends. He has really good, he talks really good about the indoctrination of our children, the woke left, the woke Joy Hoffmeister, all the key buzzwords that, and it puts the message out there that we really have to do something about that. But if you look past that, is that all that we're going to have as a state superintendent, is someone who is just going to look at that? There's so many aspects to public schools to improve them. And to do that, you have to have training and experience to be able to step in there. And so at some point, I think people will realize, the rhetoric's there. And basically, I'm saying the same rhetoric, but I'm saying, yes, we have these, and we need to keep our kids safe from that indoctrination and those issues. But also, and you have the safety issue of the shooters and those, but then also you have to know how to move education in the right direction to be able to take care of children and go back to the basics with our children. So there's a limited resource that he has for us. And that's why I'm saying 10 to 15 years from now, after he has experienced it, because you really can't make wise decisions unless you've been through it. And I mentioned the other night, I said I was forged in fire. Well, that is because I've seen things come through our schools that, that need to be stopped or looked at. And I see the excessive government overreach that even Joy's putting on us. And so I think more than, and I told him at the very beginning of this campaign that I really appreciated him being out there pushing for public schools, but the rhetoric has almost became where he's going to be superintendent of private schools. And this job is specifically for the 95%, the 700,000 across the state. And what can he do to lead them academically? And I am a fighter, but what I've learned over the years is the person that jumps out there and hollers the loudest probably doesn't know what needs to be done in detail. And so, yes, a lot of times I talk softly. People listen to me better that way. But I can be that person that really tells it like it is when it needs to be. I have a track record of 28 years here at this school, and there is no wokeness in this school. And I can guarantee that because the people that have been brought on here are like-minded as me. And we have one mission, and that is to educate each child and not push issues on them, social issues. And so, yeah, Ryan is my opponent is really aggressive at saying those things, but you have to look beyond the voice and see what kind of skills does the person have to put in. And again, if you don't have followers, then you're not going to be able to implement anything. And you've got to be able to step in a room and really take criticism.
Yeah.
And I found out the other night when I criticized his push for vouchers and the reasoning for his push for vouchers, that he didn't have the response of a superintendent. He had the response of someone who hasn't been used to being in the firing line for criticism. And as a public official, you work for people. So,
Mhm.
so you have to be ready for, you have to be able to take that and then find the agenda of the person saying it to you and work with them.
Well, let's get off of valid points, and like I said, I want to be upfront. I think that I'm a little I there's a lot I agree with Ryan when it comes to the way that he's going about the messaging. And but there's also some things I don't agree with when it comes to the policy. And so that's why I wanted to have you on and have him on and have these conversations. So one thing I hear all the time that I think is a valid question from those who are pushing or advocating for school choice is kind of the fix to the woke issue, so to speak.
Yeah.
Um, the most common retort I get or have seen is, well, what do you suggest if not that as the fix? What do you suggest if not the expansion out into maybe a private school where you can the money will follow the child, you can give the child a better education in a maybe a higher quality school, um, for the in terms of the indoctrination that will seep in through um, funding or just through time, or my issue, which is through teachers coming out of universities like the University of Oklahoma, who are being taught explicitly, whether it's what in their time in college or their time outside of college, but going to professional development through the universities, whether that's OU, OSU, UCO, all of them have this push, and it's strong. It's much stronger in Oklahoma universities than people realize. So, to my question, if not removing kids or giving the kids the option or the parents the option to vote with their feet, how are you going to protect against that? What other policies specifically? What other measures can you do as state superintendent to ensure that, because this is happening in urban places first, how are you going to remove it? And what will you do to keep it out?
Sure. And Mark, in Sapulpa this morning, I actually had this same conversation because what we talked about, and people look for the best education for their child. And I love that. And I love parents being able to choose where they want their child to go. I think that's just so important to have that on a parent's plate to drive their child's education. It comes down to what teacher do they have, since we're a human business. And, in public schools, we have 42,000 teachers. So you're going to have really great teachers, and then you're going to have a few really poor ones. But what I understand is that it's not private versus public. It's the teacher you get in one or the other. Because you can go to private schools and get really bad teachers, but you can go there and find a really great teacher that inspires you and helps you. Same thing with public. So I think the discussion has to change about, it's the person that is right there in front of your child. That's where you have to make the decision. Do I want my child at that school, whether it's private or public? What do I do to change and help and put some teeth in? If we have teachers out there teaching a social agenda, they're actually breaking the law. And that's when they have to be turned in. The local district attorney has to make the ruling, is it a crime? And if it is a crime, the state superintendent pulls the certification. There has to be teeth in that. But that's the process. And we talked about that Wednesday night about, should the state Department of Ed, should the state superintendent have subpoena power? If the state superintendent does, they could actually impede an investigation in a local county and help that person be free of any crimes because you broke their civil rights. So I love the process that's there. And then if it's not moving fast enough, then I think we can kind of stoke the fire and try to get it going. You have to have teeth behind the law. And that's why I was interested in the vote yesterday with the state board, because I think that was powerful message saying, we're not going to let you teach certain things in our schools to our kids. We're going to keep them safe. So
Why don't you go ahead and just fill in the audience on what happened at the state board yesterday? For in my interview with Ryan, he talked on this and has since called for the Oklahoma Attorney General to investigate. But why don't you give us your view of that and what you saw? Give us your breakdown, because this happened yesterday with the state board, and what your opinion on how they're using 1775. Is it good? Is it bad? Does it need to be tweaked?
You know, it could probably be a little bit more specific, but back to your statement about the Secretary of Ed was calling for the Attorney General to do that. Secretary of Ed has no power. That is just the mouthpiece of the governor. The only power the Secretary of Ed has is over the Commission of Office of Educational Quality and Accountability. That's really it. There is no power within that. So when I hear the Secretary of Ed say, the governor and I passed this law, well, that's not true, because the Secretary of Ed is just someone there that promotes educational agendas for the governor. But I like the process because it sent a message yesterday on the state board on their vote that said, we're going to follow the law. And if you're turned in for that and there is substance behind that, you're teaching a certain thing in a classroom, then we have teeth behind that law and we're going to take care of it. We're not going to let you do that, because to get public funds, you've got to follow the law and you have to do what the state of Oklahoma says. So I thought that was a pretty powerful message that was sent, and hopefully Tulsa Public will look at it and they'll correct their ways. The thing I think Tulsa is trying to say is, well, we didn't do this to the children. We're just in professional development for that. And if you're doing professional development, then that's going to teach you how to do it. So you have to get it stopped quick. And that's where sometimes the system is so big that the left hand doesn't know what the right hand's doing lots of times. And so it makes it extremely difficult. And really that's what makes it easier in schools like PEGS, the 400 schools kind of like mine across the state, that you can actually make a phone call. As state superintendent, I can call the superintendent and say, hey, this is what's reported. This is what's done. We need to know if it's really being done, and what are you going to do to take care of it? What are you going to do to stop it?
Yeah.
And I just think that's the power of the state superintendent. And it's almost like you don't automatically just kill a school and wipe them out when they're doing something wrong. You give them an admonishment, give them time to clean it up. And then if they don't do it, then you start taking sanctions on that school.
Well, and here's the thing that I want to, this is me, since you're on my show, I get to give a little bit of advice. You might be the next state superintendent. And so I'd like to, the issue here is, and this is, and I spoke about this with Ryan, and I've spoke about it with members of the state board. I've spoken about it with the governor himself. I've spoken about it with many different legislators. What is my issue has been from the beginning with 1775 was the lack of teeth in a specific area. That specific area is extracurricular. And what I mean, I don't mean by that, I don't mean football or musicals or things like that. What I'm talking about is administration, because the departments of diversity, equity, and inclusion, right, are administrative, and they are the ones that are giving the professional development and requiring teachers to do the things that are being called out right now in Tulsa Public Schools. I'm not saying that there aren't teachers who are more than happy to do it, that really want to do it. But what is a teacher going to do if, and I will use Norman Public Schools as an example, okay, because I have all of the documentation on this. Their DEI officer came out, did a training that I have online that I'm going to be putting out a whole breakdown of, where she said the words, "Our push for equity is not optional." She said those words, your commitment, and she said your commitment to equity, and equity meaning engineered outcomes using discrimination on the front end to engineer an outcome on the back end when it comes to identity. Okay. And what she had said was that we need to sometimes treat people differently in order to engineer that outcome. And that outcome is the equity, which you which you have to do. You don't have an option not to do it now. So my concern with what's happening with 1775 right now, I think it's good. The teeth are good. And are they going to point that at the teacher and not the administrative apparatus that is forcing the teachers to do that? And because I have not been in education for 28 years. I've not been, I'm Ryan's age. We are the same age. And so we came up in the same kind of, but it seems commonsensical to me that in order to fix a systemic problem, you have to go as far to the top of it and the origination of it. Think of it like cancer, right?
Yeah.
You don't do the chemo. You actually sometimes induce symptoms to get at the root of the problem. Okay. And I don't want to make a direct comparison between cancer and this. I'm not calling anybody cancer,
Right.
but you don't go after the symptom to cure the root. And I think that's a little bit of what 1775 is right now, because the rules lack the provision of the extracurricular, which goes towards the administration. And what I've seen, and what I would recommend to you and to him and to the governor and to every single legislator is the offices of DEI must be defunded and they must be removed by the legislature, by the governor, by the state superintendent, because their only job is to inject an ideological approach to all instruction. What the DEI officer said in Norman Public Schools was the goal is to embed this ideology, and they write the word on the graphics, into everything that you do. And so what happens then? What happens then? The ideology takes over the subject matter and scores drop, right? And then they can say, well, schools are bad, so we need new schools. Let's throw them all to private schools, and that's my concern here. And I've shared this, everything I'm saying to you, I've said to my audience before, I've shared with the officials before, whether it's the governor, the Secretary of Education, and so on and so forth. I've shared it with all of them. So let me get back to you. I just wanted to point that out because 1775 is good. And I know things are incremental, but they have to point that. And let me just ask you the question. As state superintendent, would you lobby for and do all within your power to remove those divisions of ideological enforcement from the administrations in public schools?
Yes. And Mark, there was two things that you said, basically who's responsible? Is it the teacher who's being forced to do the ideology, or is it the administration? And so I think if it's the teacher on their own, yes, the teacher should be responsible. But if it is forced upon them to do that, then I believe that the principal and superintendent are culpable. If it happens in my school, I'm responsible for everything that happens in that classroom. So I take responsibility for that. Now, does the teacher have to also, if they're not forced? I think so. But the simple answer to yours is yes. We shouldn't be wasting our money. And even if it's federal grants, we shouldn't be accepting federal grants to have for these positions. I think what's really concerning to me is, Tulsa just went through this with wanting to do DEI training with school board, with a school board member that just came on, and of course Elena Ashley is a friend of mine, and I saw the attacks on her, but my opponent was, and I don't want to say he's grandstanding, but I just really think if he was just being Secretary of Ed and not running for state superintendent, I don't think we would have ever seen him at Tulsa School Board. I don't think we would have seen the letters about the bathrooms to Stillwater. And I'm just, because those are just ways to get your name out there. But and the reason I say that is because if you go back last year as Secretary of Ed, as the commissioner of the OEQA, they actually made a recommendation for Medill schools to hire a $143,000 DEI coordinator. And I just thought that was a mixed message being sent. And maybe he didn't realize that's what he was doing as head of a commission. I'm not sure, but that empowered that school to do exactly what you're talking about at Norman, have that person. And so, that's where I think that's where experience and knowing the history of things really comes into play as state superintendent. And I think it's a pure waste of money. 143,000, you could possibly get two and almost three teachers that you need with that money.
Well, and I will say that I brought that up in my the issue in Middell with Ryan,
Yeah.
and he said that the executive director there was is not there anymore. But I think there is, if you're head of a commission, you're head of a commission, and so now not everybody's perfect, but but that doesn't remove you from responsibility either. And so I think that's an excellent point, and I think it's worth exploring. But here's the other aspect of it, and this is something I want to touch on with you. Just like there's a swamp in Washington, right? When it comes to the bureaucratic structure, you don't get much more bureaucratic than any education department. It is chock full of bureaucracy. It's chock full of people. You may change out the heads, even the heads of each department, but there's a whole tail that goes below that of people who have been there for a very long time and are probably working towards something that you may not see going in the right direction, say under Joy Hoffmeister or even Janet Barisi before that, or whoever. Would you then, when your first day as state superintendent, what are you going to do about that? Because I have a concern there, because that's, I think, something that, I think Ryan brought up in his, response to me that made sense, that, he came in, he was over a commission, but there were people under him working, and he didn't notice it enough to deal with the problem. And this kind of got in under the radar, right? Okay, let's give you the benefit of the doubt. What are you going to do to make sure that that happens? If you're state superintendent, Dr. Cox, and you walk in, would you be willing to clean house if that's what is necessary? Are you going to go? What is going to be your process for reviewing the workers that are helping to write grants and to helping to get money and the people who are your kind of eyes, ears, arms, and legs in that department? Are you willing to do what is necessary, if you find it necessary, to remove that kind of influence and replace it?
Yeah, yes, I am. And I think that's the duty of the state superintendent. And I think really what brings value is that I will know if they're doing their job and are they doing their job the way they're supposed to. And so, and I've been in this business long enough where I know the components of the State Department of Ed and what they're supposed to be doing. So it's not like I'll be walking in and just not knowing anything about what's going on. And plus, I've been able to watch the political structure over the last 10 years and see where things are. And, and I think what's really great about my candidacy is I don't have the education elite backing me. And I don't have basically education groups coming out and backing me. And I don't have the other side where the governor is and all those people. So when I walk into a room, the decisions I make should be best for a child. And if there's somebody working there that institutionally is not doing the best for a child, they're just doing something for a self agenda, they don't need to be there. But there are a lot of good people at the State Department of Ed, but there's a lot at the State Department that are good people and working hard. They just don't have knowledge of what needs to be done yet, and so they need to be trained in a way, because there's been issues where I've been doing like a grant, and I'll call and send my grant in, then somebody who's been there for 3 months calls me and says, "You can't do it this way." and and I know that you can, because I've done it long enough, and I know the law and I know the rules, and so that's the great part about me going in there first day, is being able to know. And I think the word is discernment. And probably the last 4 months, I've heard that word almost every other day. You have to have discernment. You have to know if a person belongs in a place they do, and if they're being truthful. And really, as a state superintendent, everybody that works at that office should be working towards the agenda that I bring in, which is basically, what can we do best to help a child? What best can we do to support public schools to help them help a child? And so the knowledge and wisdom that I have over the years will be extremely valuable. And and to and to Ryan's credit, he is right. He's come in, and you don't know all the players, but if you're the commissioner, if you're the head of a board, and you pass something like that with, even if you're not there, but if you're not there, there's a problem. But if you're there and they vote unanimous to make those recommendations, there's something wrong there. And that's just not being experienced.
Yeah.
And so nothing
Well,
wrong.
and I think those are all valid points. And it's part of the reason I wanted to bring you on and give you a fair hearing as well, because I think that, obviously if we could just mold the perfect candidate, and all of us in our own mind, we're going to do that, and we would, but we can't. And so iron sharpens iron. And I just want to say this, and I've been said this before, I'm a registered independent. I cannot vote in this election. But I have a vested interest because I'm not going to vote for the Democrat. So this is very important. But what I can offer is an ability for people to, forums are great. But, every forum where people are asking for raised hands answers, I just look
Yeah.
at it and just want to smack people. No, I want to know
I know.
what the issues are. And, if I could, I would have you guys on here going back. We would do a 4-hour long Joe Rogan style, discussion. And I think what we'd probably get out of that is some actual unified solutions and probably much better policies going down the road. So, but I digress. That's just my own
Well,
preference.
and
But
Mark, if there is a runoff, which is basically if there's 4 people running, there might be, and if both Ryan and I are in there, I can't speak for him, but I think he would love to do that too. We would love to have that, because not only does it let people see the differences, but also it advocates for public schools.
yeah.
So just time on there on your podcast and other places, I don't think either one of us would have a problem. I sure don't.
Well, and like I said, I've known Ryan longer than I've known you. I've worked with Ryan behind the scenes, and I'm just full. I've said that on my podcast. You and I have talked a few times and gotten to know each other. So, but my goal here is to get all of the things out on the floor, so to speak, out into the open. I'm tired of slogans, and that is, and let me just say that in terms of my issue with the Democratic Party. So let me take it out of this. It's all slogans. Systemic racism is a slogan. Anti-racism is a misleading slogan. Diversity, equity, inclusion. DEI is a slogan that is designed to elicit an emotional response in the positive while actually doing something very negative. And so I'm very anti-slogan. What I am for is conversation. What I am for is asking and questioning everything, whether that is, the things that you would promote in terms of, pure public school all the time, no matter what, or things that Ryan would promote in terms of school choice, and that's virtuous no matter what. A complex system means that things are complex, and that means you need to have a complex conversation. And so I really appreciate you being here and giving us your thoughts, and where you might differ. If there is a runoff, I would love to have you both on the podcast, and I would keep us till we drop, because I think this race is the most important race in the state. And that's why somebody who is very plugged into what is going on in education, am reserving any judgment, and just want to hear the information from both candidates and let people who watch me and listen to me. And I've been pushed to make a endorsement, so to speak, as if I'm important enough to do that, which I still do not believe or think. But what I want to do is make sure people can hear you
Yes.
and hear him. And you both deserve a fair hearing. And if April Grace wanted to come on, I would hear her too. But there are other issues there I don't want to get into. But if speaking to my audience, listen to both of these candidates. I said about Ryan that he has been the foremost person coming out against the issues that I speak out on this podcast. That is true. And I said that you should think about that when you go to vote in the ballot box. That's what I said on the interview with him. Dr. Cox has experience. He has a good understanding of the issues. And as he said, he knows where the bodies are buried, so to speak, and how to go after them. You need to think about that when you go into the ballot box. And I feel a little bit like I've abdicated my responsibility because I don't have to vote, but that's not my role here. My role is to be somebody who conveys information and not necessarily just gives my opinion. And so, Dr. Cox, I want to give you a few minutes to talk about why you would be the best state superintendent, and what you would do in the context of what you would do to make sure that our students are not cudgeled into believing a political ideology as mandated morality.
Well, I appreciate that. And, the only reason I'm running, the why and why I'm running is just to keep our children safe and actually educating them, get back to the basics, get to where we was when, we had family values in our schools and we didn't push issues. We didn't push social issues and, we just took care of kids. And so I've spent 28 years here growing a family and taking care of kids and working with teachers to provide that foundation for kids. So the why of my running is just to help protect our kids. And so what will I do? What kind of teeth do I have behind the state superintendent? Well, if we have rogue actors, and just like those people who come in to our system that are trying to do things to kids, and the pedophiles that we see sometimes in our teachers, the very small percentage of our teachers who it's really despicable, those things. So I'm here to protect the child. And so if we have bad actors, then they don't need a license to teach and they need to be out of the school system. I honestly believe that most of our teachers are in it for the right reason. The majority are. But we do have those bad actors that we need to get rid of. And with the teacher shortage like we are, we don't need to allow that concern to allow the bad actors into our system. So behind what I can do is actually have that hotline, actually have someone who's in charge of the hotline so you don't leave a message, and take in these concerns of parents if there's things that come up. But really, education for superintendents and most of the superintendent friends I know are really diligent about protecting children. But we still need to be on notice that that's our job, is to make sure they're safe first and that they're not being indoctrinated. And I can tell you in our school and some of the schools around me right here, I know we're just trying to teach kids. We're not trying to indoctrinate them, and we're just trying to do the best that we can to get them ready for life. And that's the way it ought to be. So I will be strong and bold, and I'm not that person that goes out and hollers and really talks loud about the indoctrination. I'm the one that just takes care of it. And that's what I've done here. We have people, I surround myself with great people that make sure those things don't happen. So really, trust is the big thing. People trust me to take care of their children. They trust me when they bring their child here that they can pick them up in the evening, and that they're not going to be damaged or their innocence taken away from them. That's what I have. That's what I bring to the table. And, and basically that's my advantage to all my opponents, is that I'm in the trenches and I've proven myself. So I'm just asking you for your vote and your confidence in me, and give me the opportunity to take care of your children, your grandchildren, your nieces and nephews, and just take care of our kids and get them ready for life, and work with the parents and keep them actively involved in what we're doing. So let's improve our schools. Let's tear down some that and rebuild them that aren't doing what they're supposed to. But let's help the majority of those schools out there that are fighting and trying to do a good thing for our kids. So experience does matter. I see it. And I would say probably the stark difference between me and my opponent is that I can be a superintendent principal in any school across the state, and I have all that training and educational degrees to do that, and my opponent does not. And someday he will be able to do that. So that's the difference. And Mark, just thank you for letting me be on here. I just wanted to, it's just so important to get out there and talk for our public schools and advocate for our kids. And people see that in my heart. And the primary reason to run is for those children. So I'll leave with that, and we'll see what happens Tuesday night. And I told Ryan, I told him, and we texted each other after that last deal, and so did April and I, and I think we all have the same heart to try to help kids. We all have a different way of going about it, different message kind of, but I think we're sincere about what we're trying to do and trying to make a difference. So I see that. I've told him from the beginning, and let's just make this better. Regardless of what happens Tuesday, let's just make this better for our kids.
I agree. Thank you so much for being here, Dr. Cox. I will say this: we are not enemies, we are friends, and that's everybody's here. We're all, we may have different visions, we may have different issues on policy, but especially in this conversation, at least at this point in time, on this race, we're much closer than we are separate. And I appreciate that word from you, and I appreciate you taking your time off the trail and to come and talk to my audience and give your point of view and why you think you should be the next state superintendent. And the last thing I want to say just to my audience is pay attention. The devil is in the details, and so are the angels. And we need to go beyond the talking points of any candidate, Dr. Cox, Brian Walters, Cindy, I mean, all of them. We need to go beyond the talking points and look at the issues. And I know that is very difficult for people who work 40, 50, 60 hours a week and are now with the economy trying to, put food on the table and make gas money. There's a lot of concern about where are, every issue from abortion to guns. These are all big things, but they don't need your guns if they have your children. And that is what my message has been, and why I brought Dr. Cox and Ryan Walters in to talk about these issues. So thank you, Dr. Cox. Everybody, welcome. If you like what we're doing here in the conversations, please like, subscribe, share these videos, especially with Ryan and with Dr. Cox, out with everyone so they can see where people, where they both see on the issues, and they can make up their mind to the best of their abilities. All right. Thank you, Dr. Cox, and everybody. Thank you so much, and we will see you soon.